Perched on a dramatic cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Laurence Harvey's Malibu mansion was the epitome of classic Hollywood opulence. The home, designed to mirror the rugged beauty of the Scottish Highlands that Harvey loved, was a retreat where the actor could escape the pressures of fame. After his death in 1973, the property took on an unsettling aura that has puzzled owners and visitors alike. The first signs of strangeness appeared shortly after the house was put on the market. A real estate agent showing the property late one evening swore she heard the faint strains of bagpipe music emanating from the study. Thinking it was a neighbor playing music, she dismissed it, only to realize the closest house was half a mile away. What made it even more bizarre was that Harvey was known for playing the bagpipes during his lifetime, a skill he had learned as a tribute to his Scottish heritage. The new owners, a couple from Los Angeles, moved in a year later. They initially adored the house's unique charm and its stunning ocean views. However, their admiration turned to apprehension as unexplainable occurrences disrupted their peace. Late at night, the sound of bagpipes often drifted through the mansion, soft and melancholic, as if someone were practicing in the distance. The eerie music seemed to originate from Harvey's old study, a room the new owners had converted into a library. One evening, the husband decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, he entered the study and found it empty, but the music persisted, echoing faintly as if trapped between the walls. The air grew cold, and a strange flicker of light caught his attention. He described it as a bluish-white flash, not unlike a camera flash, that appeared in the corner of the room and vanished before he could trace its source. The flashes of light became a regular occurrence. They weren't confined to the study. They danced across the living room walls, illuminated the upstairs hallway, and even flickered outside in the garden. Guests staying overnight reported waking to the sudden flashes, which were often accompanied by the haunting melody of the bagpipes. A particularly chilling account came from a family friend who stayed in the guest room. She claimed she was awakened by the sound of bagpipes, louder than usual, and saw a figure standing near the window, silhouetted against the moonlight. The figure appeared to be a man, his posture upright and commanding. As she reached for her phone to take a photo, the figure dissolved into thin air, leaving her paralyzed with fear. Theories about the phenomena abound. Some believe Laurence Harvey's spirit lingers in the mansion, drawn to the home where he spent his happiest years. Others speculate that the sounds and lights are residual energy, a psychic imprint of Harvey's love for music and the sea. Whatever the explanation, the house remains a source of fascination and unease. Visitors often leave with stories of their own. A fleeting shadow in the hallway, the unmistakable notes of a bagpipe in the wind, or the sudden, inexplicable flashes of light that seem to echo the brilliance of the man who once called the mansion home. One stormy evening, the current owners decided to host a small gathering, determined to reclaim their home from its unsettling reputation. They invited a mix of close friends and skeptics, hoping the presence of others would quell the uneasy atmosphere. As the waves crashed against the cliffs outside, the group settled into the grand living room, the sound of the rain on the windows providing a natural backdrop. At first, the evening was pleasant, even lively. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and the tension seemed to dissipate. But as midnight approached, the mood shifted. The rain intensified, and a sudden gust of wind howled through the mansion, rattling the windows and snuffing out several of the candles. The room plunged into partial darkness, and for a moment, everyone sat still, unnerved by the sudden change. Then came the sound, soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. The unmistakable notes of a bagpipe began to play, drifting through the house. One guest, a musician, stiffened. "That's not just any tune," he murmured. "It's Loch Lomond, but it's not coming from speakers. It sounds live." The host, visibly shaken, stood and motioned toward the study. "It's coming from in there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. No one moved at first, the group frozen in a collective unease. Finally, emboldened by the alcohol coursing through his veins, one guest, an amateur paranormal enthusiast, volunteered to investigate. Armed with his phone flashlight, he stepped into the study. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. The music stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. "Hello," he called out, his voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, the group in the living room saw it. A flash of light, brighter and more sustained than any they had witnessed before. It illuminated the study doorway, and for a fleeting second, the figure of a man could be seen standing there, clad in what looked like a Highland kilt. His face was indistinct, almost blurred, but his posture was unmistakable, proud and regal. The light vanished as quickly as it had appeared, plunging the house back into darkness. The guest emerged moments later, pale and shaking. "There was someone in there," he stammered. "I swear I saw him. He looked right at me." But the most unsettling discovery came the next morning. As the storm cleared and sunlight flooded the house, the hosts found something unusual in the study. On the desk, where no one had placed anything the night before, was a single, perfectly folded tartan handkerchief. It was old, frayed at the edges, and unmistakably authentic. "Is this some kind of prank?" the host demanded, but no one claimed responsibility. A quick internet search revealed that the tartan matched the pattern associated with Laurence Harvey's family lineage. That day, the owners decided to keep the handkerchief in a glass case in the study, unsure whether it was a gesture of peace or a warning. But the events of that night were only the beginning. The bagpipes began to play more frequently, the flashes of light more vivid and disorienting. And then there was the knocking, always 3 sharp, deliberate raps on the study door at precisely 3:03 a.m. It was as if the house itself was awakening, ready to reveal its secrets. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The knocking became the mansion's most unnerving mystery. It never faltered, 3 sharp raps, as though someone demanded entry to the study from the other side. Each time it occurred, the owners would rush to the door, only to find the room empty. More unsettlingly, the knocks weren't limited to nights when someone was awake. On 2 separate occasions, guests staying overnight heard the sound from their rooms, but the hosts, sleeping on the opposite side of the house, claimed not to hear a thing. The final straw for the couple came one particularly restless night. The wife, unable to sleep, wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water. As she passed the study, she felt a chill, sharp and sudden, like the air had been sucked from the corridor. She paused, hesitant to look inside, but then the sound of faint murmurs drew her closer. It wasn't the bagpipes this time. Instead, it sounded like 2 voices, deep and low, as though locked in a conversation just beyond the threshold. She opened the door. The study was dark, but moonlight illuminated the old tartan handkerchief in its glass case. For a moment, the murmurs stopped, replaced by a deep, almost tangible silence. Then came the flash of light, blinding and cold. When her eyes adjusted, she gasped. The room looked entirely different. Gone were the bookshelves and the desk. In their place was an old oak table, a roaring fireplace, and 2 men sitting opposite each other. One was unmistakably Laurence Harvey. He looked as though he'd stepped from one of his films, his sharp features highlighted by the firelight. The other man, older and wearing a military uniform, leaned forward, his hand resting on a set of bagpipes on the table. Their conversation was inaudible, but Harvey's expression shifted between deep concentration and occasional bursts of laughter. The wife blinked, and the vision disappeared. She was standing in the ordinary study again, heart pounding. But the bagpipes were no longer silent. This time, the melody was deafening, filling the entire house with its mournful wail. Her husband and the guests came rushing down the hall, drawn by the sound. "What's happening?" one of them shouted, but before anyone could answer, the power cut out. The mansion was plunged into pitch-black darkness, save for the eerie blue flashes of light that now seemed to leap from room to room, as if searching for something or someone. And then, over the bagpipes, another sound emerged. The knocking. 3 sharp raps, this time not from the study, but from the front door. The front door rattled with each knock, the sound reverberating through the cavernous halls. The guests huddled together in the dark, their whispered speculations growing more frantic. Who could it be at this hour? In this storm, someone asked, but no one moved to answer the door. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. The husband, fueled by equal parts fear and resolve, grabbed a heavy candlestick from the mantel and approached the door. The group trailed behind him, their collective breaths held as he reached for the handle. When he swung the door open, the howling wind outside sent a flurry of rain into the entryway. But there was no one there. Only the vast expanse of the cliffside, the ocean roaring below, and the faint glimmer of moonlight on the wet stones of the pathway. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Then they saw it. A set of wet footprints led from the edge of the cliff directly to the front door. Bare footprints, unmistakably human, yet eerily precise, as though whoever or whatever had made them had walked with deliberate purpose. They stopped abruptly at the threshold, leaving no trace of retreat. One of the guests, a history professor with a penchant for the supernatural, knelt to examine the footprints. "These are fresh," he whispered, his voice trembling. "And they're strange." He traced the outline of one print with his finger. "The arch is high, almost exaggerated. These aren't natural, they look old. Like they belong to someone who walked barefoot their whole life." Before anyone could respond, the bagpipes sounded again, now louder and more mournful than ever, as if the air itself carried the lament. The sound didn't come from the study this time, it seemed to rise from all around them, from the walls, the ceiling, even the very ground beneath their feet. The professor stood abruptly, his face pale. "This isn't just residual energy. This is deliberate. Someone or something is trying to tell us something." As if in response, the chandelier above them began to sway, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. One guest screamed as the shadows seemed to coalesce, forming shapes, figures that danced and moved as if caught in some spectral parade. Among them was a tall figure in a kilt, its face obscured but its posture unmistakable. The figure raised its arm and pointed toward the cliffside, as if beckoning them to follow. "No," the wife whispered, backing away. "No, we can't go out there." But the professor stepped forward, his curiosity outweighing his fear. "We have to. It's leading us to something." The group hesitated, torn between their instincts to flee and the inexplicable pull of the apparition. Then, as if to seal their decision, the bagpipes stopped abruptly, replaced by a single, guttural voice that echoed through the mansion. "Come." The word was unmistakable, deep and commanding, carrying an authority that sent shivers down their spines. The group turned toward the open door, where the ocean seemed to glisten unnaturally in the moonlight, its waves almost glowing. Something was waiting out there, something ancient, something tied to the house and its enigmatic history. And as they stepped onto the rain-slicked pathway, the wind whispered a haunting melody, urging them forward. The rain seemed to lessen as the group stepped outside, but the wind picked up, pulling at their clothes and hair as if trying to push them toward the cliff. The wet footprints shimmered faintly in the moonlight, guiding them along the winding path. No one spoke, the only sounds the crashing waves below and the eerie whistle of the wind, which now carried faint strains of bagpipe music, as if played from somewhere deep within the sea itself. The professor led the way, his flashlight flickering and barely piercing the darkness. He stopped suddenly, holding up his hand to silence the others. "Do you see that?" he whispered, pointing ahead. At the edge of the cliff stood a figure. It was unmistakably a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a traditional kilt that fluttered in the wind. His back was to them, his silhouette illuminated by the glow of the restless waves below. He was motionless, his arms folded across his chest, as if waiting. "Is that Harvey?" one guest dared to ask, her voice trembling. The professor didn't answer. He took a cautious step forward. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't move, but the bagpipes grew louder, the melody swelling with an almost painful intensity. The group covered their ears, some crying out in discomfort, but the professor kept moving forward, undeterred. When he was only a few feet from the edge, the music stopped abruptly, plunging the night into an unnerving silence. "Say something," the professor demanded, his voice cracking. The figure began to turn, slowly, deliberately. The group watched in horrified anticipation, the wind now swirling around them in chaotic gusts. As the figure's face came into view, the professor gasped and stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. It rolled toward the cliff's edge, its beam flickering over the rocks below. "What is it?" the husband shouted, trying to steady the professor, whose face had gone pale as chalk. He doesn't have a face," the professor stammered, his voice barely audible. "It's just nothing." The group collectively recoiled as the figure stepped closer. Its head was smooth and featureless, as if carved from stone, yet its presence exuded a chilling authority. The light from the waves below seemed to bend toward it, casting a ghastly glow over its form. Then it raised one arm and pointed downward, toward the base of the cliff. The group followed its gesture, peering over the edge despite their fear. What they saw made their blood run cold. There, in the water far below, was the faint outline of a shipwreck. The remains of a wooden vessel lay splintered among the rocks, its mast broken but its tattered sails somehow still fluttering in the wind. The bagpipes began again, this time softer, almost mournful, as if telling the story of the ship's demise. The wife clutched her husband's arm, her voice barely a whisper. "Is that connected to the house? To him?" Before anyone could answer, the faceless figure stepped closer. The air grew heavy, the wind deafening as it leaned toward the group, raising its other hand. In its grasp was something glinting, a piece of weathered metal, etched with intricate designs. The professor recognized it immediately. "That's a clan crest," he said, his voice trembling. "From a family of Scottish warriors. But it's impossible, it's centuries old." The figure held out the crest, as if offering it to the group. No one moved to take it. The air around them seemed to pulse with unseen energy, and the glow from the cliff intensified until they could barely see. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The crest clattered to the ground, and the bagpipes ceased mid-note. The silence was suffocating. But before they could process what had happened, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A deep, guttural groan rose from the rocks below, like the earth itself awakening. The waves crashed violently against the cliff, sending sprays of water so high they drenched the group. The professor picked up the crest with shaking hands, turning it over. His eyes widened in terror as he read the inscription etched on its back, "Blood binds us to the depths." At that moment, the path behind them disappeared, swallowed by a sudden collapse of the cliffside. They were trapped, with the ocean on one side and the shifting earth on the other. And somewhere in the roaring wind, a voice began to laugh low, gravelly, and unmistakably human. The laughter grew louder, echoing around them as if the cliffs themselves were mocking their fear. The professor clutched the crest tightly, his knuckles white as he turned to face the group. "We have to go back. We can't stay here." But as they looked toward the mansion, the path behind them was gone, crumbled into the sea. They were stranded on the edge of the cliff, the violent waves below threatening to swallow what remained of the ground beneath their feet. The faceless figure was gone, but its presence lingered, a cold, suffocating weight in the air. The wife gripped her husband's arm, her voice trembling. "What does it mean? The inscription, what does it mean?" The professor shook his head, his eyes darting between the crest and the glowing wreckage below. "I don't know," he admitted, "but this ship, this has to be where it all began. The house, the music, everything it's tied to that ship." As if in response, the ocean roared with renewed fury. The wreck below seemed to shimmer, its broken mast rising unnaturally upright. The torn sails filled with an invisible wind, and the ship began to move, not outward to sea, but upward, toward them. The group stumbled backward in horror as the wreck rose higher and higher, its jagged hull dripping with seawater and trailing kelp. The bagpipes returned, louder and more triumphant, their melody a twisted celebration. The professor's face turned ashen. "It's not a shipwreck anymore. It's rising." The wreck hovered before the cliff's edge, impossibly suspended in the air. Figures began to emerge from its deck's ghostly forms, translucent but unmistakably human. They were clad in ancient Scottish garb, their faces twisted in expressions of rage and sorrow. At the helm stood the faceless figure, its blank visage now illuminated by an eerie blue light. One of the ghostly figures stepped forward, pointing a spectral finger at the group. Its voice was a guttural snarl, each word heavy with accusation. You trespass on cursed ground. Blood binds us to the depths, and now it binds you. The ground beneath them trembled violently. The husband grabbed his wife, pulling her back as a crack snaked across the cliff's edge, separating them further from safety. The professor, still clutching the crest, looked at the spectral crew and then at the ship. "It's not us you want," he shouted, his voice cracking. "It's him, Laurence Harvey. He's the one who brought you here, who disturbed your rest." The faceless figure turned its head toward the professor, and for a brief moment, the blank slate seemed to ripple, as though a face was trying to emerge. Then it pointed at the crest in the professor's hand. "You carry the mark," the figure intoned, its voice like grinding stone. "The debt is yours now." The professor stumbled, his eyes wide with panic. "No, I don't." His words were cut off as the spectral crew surged forward, their translucent hands reaching for him. The crest fell from his grasp, landing on the rocky ground with a metallic clang. The wife screamed as the ghostly forms enveloped the professor, their voices rising in a terrible, mournful wail. The ground beneath him gave way, and he disappeared, swallowed by the churning sea below. The remaining group huddled together, too terrified to move. The ship began to retreat, its ghostly crew disappearing one by one until only the faceless figure remained. It lingered at the helm, its empty face turned toward them, before it too vanished in a swirl of mist. The wreck descended back into the ocean, leaving only the dark waves crashing against the cliffside. When the bagpipes finally fell silent, the group stood in stunned silence, the storm dissipating around them. The wife was the first to speak, her voice barely audible. "What happens now?" The husband bent to pick up the crest, now lying innocuously at his feet. The inscription was gone, the metal cool to the touch. He turned it over in his hands, frowning. "We leave," he said firmly, "and we don't come back." But as they made their way back to the mansion, another sound followed them, soft at first, but growing louder with each step. It was the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing just behind them. When they turned to look, the path was empty. Yet the footsteps continued, keeping pace with them all the way back to the house. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.